Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday night reading in the book of Genesis. And I'm hoping that you are enjoying us going through the first book of our Bibles, where we look at time before so many modern inventions, time way before even Moses came on and established the religion of Judaism, where God established the religion of Judaism through Moses. And we're talking about Father Abraham's life. And Abraham is known as the father of the faithful. And Abraham is given the promise. And even in the New Testament, we're told to think about being heirs of the promise of Abraham, or the heirs of the promise that was given to Abraham through Jesus, and so on. So Abraham is a very important person. He is a person who exemplifies the life of faith, and he shows us, by the way, that being a person of faith means at times that you will be imperfect, and there will be times where you lack in your trusting of God, and it's not an excuse, and it's not something that says, oh, well, it's okay because Abraham also didn't trust in God, but it's a reminder that sometimes when we don't trust in God, there are still consequences in our life, as there was in Abraham's life, but at the same time, it doesn't mean we're disqualified from a life of faith of following God. And I think that's the encouragement we need to have, is that we need to continue to trust in God, because when we don't trust in God, we find ourselves in troubles or problems that we don't know how to look beyond. But at the same time, when we mess up, it doesn't mean God has forgotten about us, or it doesn't mean that God has said, you know what, I don't care about you anymore. There's no hope for you anymore. And that's, I think, an important lesson for those of us who are trying to live by faith. So we're in Genesis chapter 18, 19, and 20 this evening. We're nearing the end of the real focus on Abraham's life. Only a few more chapters in the book of Genesis, but this man casts such a long shadow that it's important for us to talk about his life. So we're going to be in chapter 18, chapter 19, chapter 20. We're going to be focusing on one of the more famous or well-known events in biblical history, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're going to notice perhaps that, or just hit on the fact that there's been a lot of perhaps misunderstanding about what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, because it's talked about quite a bit in Scripture. It's talked about in the Old Testament prophets afterwards. It's talked about in the New Testament. Jesus mentions it, and also some of the writers mention it. So we just want to focus a little bit about it. So chapter 18, it begins, chapter 18, remember, Abraham was given the promise that he was going to have a son at the age of 100. And he had been trying to do things his own way, and they kept messing up. He had been trying to take over for God, or trying to get God out of a problem, and things kept messing up. He was told in chapter 17 he was going to have a son, and he began to laugh. Chapter 18, some angels, though he doesn't know they're angels, come to visit Abraham. Abraham is very gracious in hosting. Christians are told in Hebrews chapter 13 that they're to remember this incident because some entertain angels unaware, that we're to be gracious to people. So Abraham's gracious. They give him a promise that through Sarah, his wife, who is 90 years old, they will have a child. And remember, Abraham laughed about it in chapter 17. This time Sarah laughs. And Isaac, his name means, is connected to laughter. That somehow there's just no way God can do this, but he is going to do it. And they learn after all this time that trusting in God would have saved a lot of heartache. But when we get to chapter 18, and why I didn't focus on that, is that God is also going to do something about the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah. And God decides that he should inform Abraham about it because they are so close. And I want us to notice the great bargain that Abraham has with God over Sodom and Gomorrah. So we're going to begin our reading in verse 22 of chapter 18 through verse 33. It says, "So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, 'Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked?'" So he's speaking to the Lord this way. "Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham answered and said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. So Abraham knows this is a bold position to take. I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? So he brings it down to 45, and God says, I won't destroy it for 45. Abraham brings it down to 40. God says, I won't destroy it for 40. Then in verse 30, it says, Abraham says, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. And the Lord answers, I will not do it if I find 30. And Abraham keeps bringing this humility to the Lord, but then being bold in his asking. And God promises not to destroy it for 20. And then finally in verse 32 says, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he answers, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And so you have this great bargain Abraham has with the Lord. And first of all, I want to just begin by noticing how gracious God was, because he's allowing Abraham to be this bold. And number 2, he's allowing Abraham to lower the number, to change the contract, to change the bargain. And I wonder if Abraham stopped too high. Now, one of the things that might be on Abraham's mind, of course, is he knows his nephew Lot and his family is in Sodom. And he knows that his nephew Lot is not as wicked as God is saying Sodom is wicked. And so he's seeking a way perhaps to rescue Lot. But also, there is a broader issue here as far as Abraham is concerned. And you'll notice how he says this over and over again to God. It's the larger issue of justice. And Abraham is very clear, and he says, will not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And the issue of justice for Abraham, as far as he's concerned, is wiping out a whole city when there might be some righteous there. Why should the righteous, the innocent, have the same fate as the wicked? And it's a great bargain. And God agrees with Abraham. And so this is important to remember, because when we get to chapter 19, even though they cannot find 10 there, we now find out what God will do when he comes to Sodom and Gomorrah with his judgment. Now, I'm going to read verses 4 through 11, and I want to just bring up a possible, which I believe is, misunderstanding of what's going on at Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think it would help us in today's culture especially. It says, beginning in verse 4, before they lay down, that being the two had left Abraham and had now gone to Sodom. And Lot welcomes them into his home. Lot shows the same hospitality that Abraham showed. And Lot is concerned for their safety. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them. Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, stand back. And they said, this fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with him. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot, and drew near to break the door down. But the men, who are angels, right, reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they themselves were groping for the door. All right. So first of all, a lot of times when I say traditional, I don't mean all the way back to Jesus' day. I just mean in the last 100, 200 years, people have thought this was a case against homosexuality, because all the men of the city come to the door and they want to know them, the visitors of Lot. And Lot says, don't do this wickedness. Here are my daughters. Do whatever you want with them. and they say, no, we're going to do it to these men. But if you notice, first of all, from the context itself, it seems very unreal that this would be the case when it says every male of the city, which would imply that every male of the city of Sodom was homosexual, which would be a very difficult case to believe in any other context. More appropriately, this is an act of great inhospitality. And it's more what victorious armies used to do to their captors, where it was an act of humiliation. It was a rape assault. And this is more in line with what's going on at Sodom and Gomorrah than the fact that God is mad at them because they were gay. That's not what's going on here. This is a gross act of inhospitality, which is this violent rape of the stranger, this humiliation. And Lot is not doing any justice by offering his daughters either, by the way. As the story goes, and you can look up more about Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible, and you'll get the sense there of why they were considered so wicked by God. And so anyways, what happens here is the angels then say to Lot, you can rescue your family and you can leave, and no one is supposed to look back. And of course, remember, Lot's wife looks back. She has eyes for Sodom, and she turns to salt, right? And the destruction is great. And this is always going to be evidence of God's judgment when we treat our fellow humans inhumanely. In any ways, as it goes, and then Lot's daughters do something that even in the, it kind of grosses us out, but in the culture of the day, you're so worried about passing on your genes and so on, and so they end up. But what you notice in this story, when Abraham asked God, shall not the judge of the earth do what is just? Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? We see God's answer is no, even though they couldn't find 10 people. That God is able to rescue his righteous people. And the New Testament in 2 Peter uses this as an example for us, that God's judgment is controlled and he's not going to make mistakes. And this is a great point of our faith, is that even when we're one among a million, God is able to rescue us. And so then we get to chapter 20, and after all that's gone on, and the promise of Isaac is given, we notice that Abraham makes a mistake again. It says, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 20, from there Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negeb, which is the south, and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, again, he does this again, she is my sister. And Abimelech king of Gerar sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, you are a dead man, because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, Lord, will you kill an innocent people? And he does the same bargain that that Abraham did over Sodom, right? Will you kill an innocent people? And then Abimelech says, did he, Abraham, not himself say to me, she is my sister, and she herself said, he is my brother? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this. And then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. So in a way, as God rescued Lot, he's also rescuing Abimelech. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. So Abimelech is held innocent by God, but now that he knows He now has responsibility, and God will not hold him innocent, even though he was originally tricked by Abraham. Now he knows. But we notice again Abraham's mistake. And Abraham, even though a man of faith, has moments where he lacks trust. They make an agreement. Abimelech gives Abraham actually gets off with some possessions over this. But we'll notice a little bit of sarcasm when Abimelech says in verse 16 to Sarah, "Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a sign of your innocence in the eyes of all who are with you, and before everyone you are vindicated." Abimelech cares more for Sarah in this story than Abraham did. He wants everyone to know that Sarah has remained innocent. This is important, especially with what's coming next. There'll be no question who the father of Isaac is. But we notice again the danger that Abraham's lack of faith in God put his own life, his wife, and the promise in. Yes, we can come back from moments where we don't trust God. However, the consequences of those moments can be very heavy in our lives. God bless everyone.